Let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question before you answer it. Think about the last time something caught you off guard. Maybe it was a message you didn't expect, a conversation that went sideways, a moment where everything felt like it was slipping and you needed to be sharp, steady, present, and instead something inside you just collapsed. You didn't plan for that reaction. You didn't choose it. It just happened, and afterward you probably replayed it, wishing you had said something different, done something different, been someone different in that moment. Here's what I want you to know right now before we go any further. That moment didn't happen because you're weak. It happened because you were untrained. And that right there is something you can actually change. This isn't a motivational audiobook. Motivation is like a hot shower. It feels incredible while it lasts, and the moment it's over, you're cold again. What you're about to experience is something different. This is training. Real, structured, repeatable mental training. The kind that doesn't just make you feel better for an hour. The kind that rewires how you respond when life gets heavy. Over the next several chapters, you're going to build something most people spend their whole lives wishing they had, but never actually construct. A mind that stays in control when everything around you is pushing for chaos. Stay with me, because what's coming is going to change how you think, how you respond, and ultimately, how you win. Introduction. This is not about motivation. You've probably been here before. You found something, a book, a video, a podcast, that lit you up. You felt it in your chest, that fire, that sense of, yes, this is it. This time things are going to be different. And for a few days, maybe even a week or two, things were different. You woke up earlier. You were more patient. You felt focused and clear, and like the best version of yourself was finally showing up. And then life happened. A stressful week at work. A difficult conversation with someone you love. A night where sleep didn't come and the morning felt impossible. And slowly, quietly, that fire went out. And you were back to reacting instead of responding. Back to making decisions from emotion instead of intention. Back to feeling like circumstances were running your life instead of you. Sound familiar? That's not a failure of character. That's a failure of training. See, motivation is real, but it's not reliable. It comes and goes based on sleep, stress, what you ate, what someone said to you last Tuesday. You cannot build a life on something that inconsistent. You need something deeper, something that doesn't depend on how you feel that morning. You need a trained mind. A trained mind doesn't ask, do I feel ready? It asks, what needs to happen? A trained mind doesn't wait for the right mood to show up with discipline. It shows up anyway because showing up is the standard, not the exception. Here at Better You Audiobooks, we didn't build this for people who want to feel inspired for a day. We built this for people who are genuinely tired of the gap between who they are under pressure and who they know they're capable of being. If that's you, you're in exactly the right place. Throughout this training, you're going to move through 8 core principles of mental strength. Each one is a skill. Each one is trainable. And each one, when practiced consistently, changes not just how you think, but who you become. This is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming a steadier, more grounded, more deliberate version of the person you already are. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. Win the game. Nobody sees you playing. There's a game happening inside you right now. It's been happening your whole life. Most people don't even know it exists. And that's exactly why they keep losing it. It's called the inner game. And it is, without question, the most important game you will ever play. Before anything shows up in your relationships, your work, your health, your sense of self-worth, it shows up here, in the quiet, invisible space between what happens to you and how you respond to it. In the fraction of a second between a trigger and a reaction. In the internal conversation you have with yourself at 2 a.m. when you're questioning everything. That's where the real game is played, and that's where most people lose, long before the external failure ever becomes visible. Think about the last time something went wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, just the everyday kind of wrong. A plan that fell apart, a person who let you down, a goal that felt further away than it did yesterday. Before anything external happened, something internal happened first. Doubt crept in. Frustration tightened your chest. Your focus fractured. And by the time you were dealing with the actual situation, you were already operating from a depleted, reactive place. That's the inner game being lost, quietly, without fanfare, without anyone else even noticing. The first principle of mental training is this: you must win inside before you can win outside. Now, I know that sounds simple, maybe even a little abstract. So let me make it concrete. Imagine two people walking into the same high-pressure situation. Let's say a conversation with someone who's upset with them. Someone who's coming in with frustration, maybe some accusations, a raised voice. The first person walks in already activated. Their heart rate is up. They're rehearsing defenses in their head. They're scanning for attacks before any arrive. By the time the conversation starts, they're already in fight mode. They interrupt. They escalate. They say something they'll regret. And even if they win the argument, they lose the relationship a little. They lose some self-respect. They feel awful afterward. The second person walks in having already done something the first person never thought to do. They took 30 seconds before entering the room to breathe deliberately, to remind themselves, I don't need to win this conversation. I need to stay in control of myself through it. Their inner game is set, and because it's set, they can actually hear what the other person is saying. They can respond instead of react. They can hold space instead of creating damage. Same situation, completely different outcomes. The only difference? What happened inside before a single word was spoken. That's the inner game. Now here's what most people do instead of training it. They focus entirely on the external. They try to manage circumstances. They try to control other people's behavior. They try to find better strategies, better tactics, better words, and all of that might help. But none of it works if the internal foundation is shaky. It's like trying to build a house on sand. You can use the best materials in the world. You can hire the best architects. But if the ground beneath it isn't solid, it doesn't matter. Your inner game is the ground. Everything else gets built on top of it. So how do you train it? It starts with awareness. And I want to be specific here, because awareness is one of those words that gets thrown around so much it starts to feel meaningless. What I mean by awareness is this: the ability to notice what's happening inside you in real time without immediately reacting to it. Most people are not aware of their inner experience. They don't notice the subtle tightening in their chest when someone challenges them. They don't catch the moment their thoughts start spiraling. They don't recognize the difference between being grounded and being activated until they've already said or done something from the activated state. Training begins by closing that gap, by learning to notice earlier, to feel the shift happening inside you before it takes over. Try this. Think of a recent moment when you reacted in a way you weren't proud of. Now, rewind it mentally. Where did it actually start? Not the external event, but the internal one. Was there a thought that came first? A sensation in your body? A shift in your breathing? That moment, that early, subtle signal, is your training window. That's where the work happens. Because once you can notice it, you can interrupt it. And the interruption is everything. When you feel the pull toward a reactive response, there's one question that can change the entire direction of the moment. What would a controlled response look like right now? Not a suppressed response, not an emotionless response, a controlled one. Controlled responses aren't dramatic. They don't always feel satisfying in the immediate moment, but they protect something far more valuable than temporary relief. They protect your long-term position, your relationships, your reputation, your self-respect. Here's the truth about emotions that most people miss. Feeling something intensely is not the same as being right, and expressing something intensely is not the same as being strong. Emotional reactions feel powerful in the moment. They release tension. They feel authentic. But they give your power away to the situation, to the other person, to whatever triggered you. The trained mind understands a different equation. The event is not yours to control. The response always is. When you say, "She made me angry," or "That situation stressed me out," you're doing something subtle but significant. You're assigning authorship of your internal state to something external. You're saying, "I don't run this." They do. That does. And the moment you accept that, you've handed over your power. Winning the inner game means taking that power back, not through force, not through suppression, through training, through the deliberate, consistent practice of pausing, noticing, and choosing. Small moments. Every day, that's where it's built. The person who stays composed when someone cuts them off in traffic is practicing the same skill as the person who stays composed during a boardroom crisis. The scale is different. The training is the same. And over time, this is the part I want you to really feel, over time, something remarkable happens. The pause gets longer. The activation gets quieter. The space between stimulus and response expands. Not because life got easier, because you got steadier. And steadiness, quiet, consistent, unannounced steadiness, is one of the rarest and most powerful things a human being can develop. It changes how you move through rooms. It changes how people speak to you. It changes how you speak to yourself. It changes what you're capable of in the moments that actually matter. Win the inner game. Everything else follows. Chapter 2. Let discipline drive when feelings grab the wheel. Let's talk about something that might be a little uncomfortable. Most of us were raised with a version of this idea. Follow your heart. Trust your feelings. If it feels right, it probably is. And there's beauty in that. There really is. Feelings are important. They carry information. They connect us to what matters to us. I'm not here to tell you to shut them off or pretend they don't exist. But here's what nobody told you growing up. Feelings are unreliable drivers. They're excellent passengers. They can tell you a lot about where you are, what you need, what's important to you. But hand them the wheel. Let them make the decisions, set the schedule, determine whether you show up today, and you will spend your life swerving. Think about it. How many times have you said, "I'll do it when I feel ready," and the readiness never quite arrived? How many important things have you postponed because you woke up and the motivation just wasn't there? How many times have you acted from emotion and then spent the next day dealing with the aftermath? That's not weakness. That's what happens when feelings are driving. Discipline exists to solve exactly this problem. And I want to reframe what discipline actually is, because most people have a complicated relationship with the word. They hear discipline and they think restriction, punishment, white-knuckling through things you hate. That's not what discipline is. Discipline is freedom. Let me say that again, because it matters. Discipline is freedom. When you have it, you are free from the constant internal negotiation, free from the exhausting debate every morning about whether today is the day, free from the regret that comes from choosing comfort over commitment again and again, free from the emotional roller coaster of a life where your actions are entirely dependent on your mood. Discipline is the decision made in advance. It's the version of you that already decided, before the alarm went off, before the hard conversation arrived, before the moment of temptation showed up, who you are and how you act. Here's a simple way to feel the difference. You don't decide every morning whether to brush your teeth. You don't lie there thinking, do I feel motivated enough for oral hygiene today? You just do it. It's not a decision anymore. It's a standard. Now imagine if your most important commitments work the same way. What if showing up for your goals wasn't a daily negotiation, but a daily non-negotiable? What if the question wasn't, do I feel like it, but simply, is this what I do? That's what disciplined people have built. Not superhuman willpower, a different relationship with choice. They've removed certain choices from the emotional weather system. Here's where it gets practical. The untrained mind is constantly negotiating. I'll start tomorrow. I don't feel up to it today. I'll do double tomorrow to make up for it. Those negotiations feel harmless. They feel reasonable. But every single time you negotiate with your standards and comfort wins, you teach your mind something dangerous, that your commitments are optional, and optional commitments don't build anything. Every time you follow through when you don't feel like it, you teach your mind something different. My standards are real. I am someone who does what I said I would do. That lesson, repeated over weeks and months and years, becomes identity. And identity is the most powerful force in human behavior. You don't need to motivate an identity. You just need to live it. Now, I want to acknowledge something real here. Building discipline is genuinely uncomfortable at first. Your mind will resist. It will manufacture very convincing reasons why today is the exception. It will amplify fatigue and downplay the importance of the commitment. It will tell you that one missed day doesn't matter. Don't fight that feeling. You don't need to fight it. You just need to not obey it. There's a difference between acknowledging discomfort and surrendering to it. A trained mind can sit with the discomfort of not wanting to do something and do it anyway. Not from punishment, from standard. And here's what happens over time. the resistance quiets, not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually the debate shortens. The morning negotiation takes less energy. The discipline begins to feel less like pushing a boulder uphill and more like rolling along a path you've already worn smooth. Because that's what repetition does. It creates grooves, and eventually the grooved path becomes the default. One more thing about discipline that I think is deeply underappreciated: it builds self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of everything. When you trust yourself, when you know from experience that you follow through, that you don't disappear when things get hard, that you are reliable to yourself, something shifts. You stop overthinking. You stop second-guessing every decision. You stop needing external validation before you move. You just move. That quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need an audience, the kind that doesn't crumble when circumstances change, is built one followed-through commitment at a time. Feelings will always show up. Let them. Feel them fully. And then let discipline drive. Calm is not a personality. It's a practice. I want you to picture someone you know, or maybe someone you've observed from a distance, who just seems to have it together when things get hard. Maybe it's a person at work who, when everything is on fire and everyone else is spiraling, somehow stays measured. They don't raise their voice. They don't freeze. They don't start throwing blame around the room. They just think clearly, calmly, and somehow in the middle of the chaos, they find the thread that leads everyone else to solid ground. You've probably looked at someone like that and thought, they're just built that way. That's their personality. I'm not wired like that. I need you to hear this clearly, maybe more clearly than anything else in this entire training. That person was not born calm. They trained calm. Calm is not a personality trait. It is not a gift distributed randomly at birth to the lucky few. It is a skill, a trainable, developable, repeatable skill. The same way swimming is a skill or playing an instrument is a skill. You weren't born knowing how to do either of those things. You learned, you practiced, you got better. Calm works exactly the same way. And here's why this matters so much. Pressure is unavoidable. It's not coming eventually. It's already here, and it will keep coming. Deadlines, difficult people, unexpected setbacks, moments where everything you planned stops working and you need to think clearly under fire. If you're waiting for those moments to pass before you feel steady, you will spend most of your life feeling unsteady, because the moments don't pass, they just change shape. But if you train calm the way you'd train any other skill, deliberately, consistently, with real practice, then pressure stops being your enemy. It becomes just another condition you know how to operate in. So let's talk about what actually happens in your body and mind when pressure shows up. Because understanding the mechanics changes everything. When you encounter a stressful situation, a sudden conflict, an unexpected problem, a moment where the stakes feel high, your body responds before your mind does. Your breathing shallows. Your shoulders rise toward your ears. Your jaw tightens. Your thoughts accelerate and start jumping between scenarios, worst cases, possible responses, all at once. If you don't catch this early, your mind follows your body into panic. And once the mind is in panic, you're no longer thinking, you're reacting. And reactions under panic almost never lead anywhere good. Here's the critical insight most people miss. The mind doesn't calm the body under pressure. The body calms the mind. Read that again, because it runs counter to everything most people try. Most people, when they feel themselves getting activated, try to think their way to calm. They tell themselves to relax. They reason with themselves. They try to logically process their way back to steadiness. And it doesn't work, not because they're not smart enough, but because they're working in the wrong direction. The body is upstream of the mind in moments of stress, which means the fastest way to regain mental clarity is through physical intervention first. Slow your breath, deliberately, consciously, purposefully. Slow it down, not a gasp. A slow, controlled exhale, longer than the inhale. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Unclench your jaw. Feel your feet on the floor. These aren't fluffy wellness suggestions. They are neurological instructions. When you do these things, you send a direct signal to your nervous system. We are not in danger. We do not need to be in fight or flight. And your nervous system listens. It downregulates. It shifts from threat mode to thinking mode. And suddenly, not magically but practically, you can see the situation more clearly. You can hear what's actually being said instead of what your fear thinks is being said. You can choose instead of react. That sequence, body first, then mind, is the foundation of trained calm. Now, here's where the training part comes in. You don't build this capacity by waiting for big, stressful moments and hoping you hold it together. You build it in small, ordinary, everyday situations. The moment when someone says something that irritates you and you feel the flicker of annoyance, that's a training moment. The moment when plans change unexpectedly and you feel the resistance rising. Training. Moment. The moment when someone is taking forever in front of you and impatience starts tapping at the door. Training moment. These small provocations are your gym. Every time you choose to breathe instead of react, every time you let the moment pass through you instead of taking you over, you're adding a layer of resilience. You're extending the amount of pressure your system can hold without tipping into chaos. Over time, and I want to be honest with you here, this takes time. It doesn't happen in a week. But over time, your nervous system genuinely adapts. The threshold shifts. What used to feel overwhelming starts to feel manageable. What used to take you an hour to recover from takes you 10 minutes. And eventually, you find yourself in situations that would have completely derailed the old version of you, and you notice, almost with surprise, that you're steady. Not because the situation was easy, because you trained for it. There's something else about calm that doesn't get talked about enough. It's contagious. When you walk into a tense situation and you are genuinely, groundedly calm, not performing calm, not suppressing panic, but actually operating from a stable internal place, other people feel it. They don't always know why. They just feel like the temperature in the room is different, like there's a steadiness they can orient toward. This is not manipulation. It's physics. Human nervous systems are wired to mirror each other. When someone panics near you, your stress response activates. When someone is genuinely calm near you, your system receives permission to settle. This means your calm is never just for you. It's a gift to every room you walk into, every conversation you have, every person who is in crisis and needs someone to be the anchor. Being the anchor is a form of leadership, not the loud, declarative, look-at-me kind of leadership. The quiet, grounded, I'm not going anywhere kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but changes everything, and it's available to you, not when you become a different person. Starting now, with the next moment that tests you. Feel the pressure. Breathe first. Let the body settle. Then think. That simple sequence, practiced enough times, becomes who you are under fire. Calm is not absence of feeling. Calm is presence of control. Train it like your life depends on it. Because in many of the moments that matter most, it does. Chapter 4. The pause that changes everything. Let's be honest about something. Reactions feel good. In the moment, that split second where something triggers you and you fire back immediately, there's a sense of power in it. A sense of, I'm not going to let that slide. I'm not a pushover. I'm going to make sure they know how I feel. And sometimes that instinct is right. Sometimes speaking up quickly is exactly what the situation calls for. But most of the time, that immediate reaction is not strength. It's surrender. Here's why. The moment you react without choosing to react, you've handed control of your behavior to whatever triggered you. A comment, a look, a tone of voice, a text message read in the wrong mood. That thing, that external event you didn't even fully understand yet, is now driving your actions. You've become the passenger in your own response. That's not power. That's automation. An automated responses built from unprocessed emotion will cost you more than you realize. In relationships, in opportunities, in the quiet erosion of your own self-respect. The antidote isn't suppression. It isn't pretending you didn't feel something or building a wall around your emotions. The antidote is the pause. The pause is deceptively simple. It's the space. Sometimes a breath, sometimes a few seconds, sometimes a deliberate choice to sleep on something before responding, between what happens to you and what you do about it. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived some of the most extreme conditions a human being can endure, wrote about this space. He called it the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose your response regardless of circumstance. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is your power. That space is what we're building here. Now, I want to be real with you about something. The pause is uncomfortable, especially at first. When something triggers you and your nervous system is activated and every instinct in your body is screaming, respond now, defend yourself, say something. Sitting in the pause feels wrong. It feels weak. It feels like letting something go unchallenged. Your mind will pressure you. It will tell you, if you don't respond immediately, they'll think they can walk over you. If you wait, you'll miss your chance. If you stay quiet, it looks like you don't care. Those voices are lying to you. Silence is not weakness. Uncontrolled reaction is. Think about the people you respect most, the ones who seem to carry real authority, not the performative kind, but the genuine kind. Do they respond immediately to every provocation? Do they fire back at every challenge? Or do they have this quality of stillness, like they're not in a hurry to prove anything, like they've already decided who they are and they're not scrambling to defend it? That stillness is the pause made habitual. It's the result of training the gap between trigger and response until it's wide enough for choice to live in. Here's a practical way to work with this. When you feel a reaction forming, and you'll start to notice it earlier the more you practice, ask yourself one question. Is this a response or a reaction? A response comes from your values, from your standards, from a considered understanding of what the situation actually calls for. A reaction comes from your nervous system's attempt to protect itself from discomfort. Responses build. Reactions damage. You don't always need to answer that question quickly. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply say, "Let me think about that," or say nothing at all, or take a breath and come back to the conversation in an hour when the activation has settled. None of that is weakness. All of it is mastery. Let's talk about what happens when you regularly choose response over reaction. Something interesting occurs over time. The people around you start to relate to you differently. They stop trying to provoke reactions from you because the reactions don't reliably come. They start bringing you their harder problems because they trust you'll stay clear-headed. They treat you with a different quality of respect, not because you demanded it, but because your consistency earned it. Reactive people are predictable in the worst way. You know exactly which buttons to press to get a response from them. They broadcast their triggers. They advertise their vulnerabilities. And consciously or not, people use that information to manipulate, to deflect, to avoid accountability by getting the reactive person to escalate. The person who doesn't react predictably, much harder to manipulate, much harder to destabilize. The power dynamic shifts almost automatically. But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't about becoming strategic or calculated or closed off. The goal isn't to become someone who never shows emotion, who processes everything in cold silence, who never lets anyone know they're affected. The goal is selectivity, intentionality, choosing which moments deserve your energy, which emotions deserve expression, and which situations deserve the full force of your response, rather than giving all of that away automatically to whoever happens to trigger you on any given day. Your emotional energy is finite. Every reactive moment depletes it. Every time you get pulled into an unnecessary battle, you spend something you can't immediately get back. Controlled people conserve their energy. They deploy it deliberately. And because they're not constantly running on empty from fighting battles that don't matter, they have real reserves for the moments that do. There's also a deeper dimension to this, one that I think is worth sitting with. When you control your reactions, you change your relationship with yourself. You start to trust yourself in a new way. You know that even when someone says something that stings, you're not going to blow up the situation. Even when things don't go your way, you're not going to say something you can't take back. Even when the pressure is high, you're not going to let your worst impulses write the story. That trust in yourself, with yourself, is deeply stabilizing. It reduces the low-level anxiety that comes from never quite knowing how you're going to respond in difficult situations. It creates a kind of inner predictability that makes life feel less chaotic. Because even when the outside world is unpredictable, you know your inside world is steady. Control your reactions, not to suppress who you are, to protect what you're building. The pause is where your power lives. Practice finding it. Practice choosing it. Practice letting it become the reflex that replaces the ones that have been costing you. Because in a world that is constantly trying to provoke, destabilize, and pull you off your center, the ability to pause, to breathe, to choose is one of the most radical and powerful things you can do. And it starts with one breath. Right now, in this moment, take it. Chapter 5. The Quiet Art of Staying. When everything says, go. There's a moment in almost every meaningful pursuit where the excitement wears off. You know the moment I'm talking about. It's not the beginning. The beginning is energizing. You're fired up. You have a vision. You can feel the possibility. Everything feels new and full of potential, and you think this time is different. This time I'm going to see it through. And it's not the dramatic, hard moment either. The obvious crisis, the clear setback that everyone can see and sympathize with. Those moments are almost easier to push through because at least they feel significant. At least the difficulty is visible. The moment I'm talking about is quieter than either of those. It's the Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks in, when the novelty has completely worn off, when results aren't visible yet, when the work feels repetitive and unremarkable and slightly boring, and there's no applause coming, and you can't quite remember why you started, and the couch looks incredibly appealing, and a voice inside you starts whispering, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should try something different. Maybe I should take a break and come back when I feel more motivated. That moment, that ordinary, undramatic, deeply unglamorous moment, is where most people's journeys end. Not because they hit a wall they couldn't climb, because they encountered boredom and mistook it for a sign. Mental endurance is the skill that keeps you in the room when that moment arrives. And I want to be honest with you about what it actually is because I think it gets misrepresented. Mental endurance is not about intensity. It's not about gritting your teeth and white-knuckling through misery. It's not about being the hardest, toughest, most pain-tolerant person in the room. Those images of endurance, dramatic, strained, suffering, they actually miss the point. Real mental endurance is quieter than that. It's the ability to remain steady when discomfort lingers, to keep showing up when the reward isn't immediate, to stay present in the process when the process feels slow and unremarkable and invisible to everyone, including sometimes yourself. It's the long-distance runner's relationship with their own legs at mile 18, not ecstatic, not destroyed, just continuing, one foot in front of the other, present, committed, not because it feels incredible, but because stopping was never really on the table. That quality, that patient, persistent, unglamorous staying power, is one of the most decisive factors in who actually achieves what they set out to achieve. More than talent, more than intelligence, more than timing or opportunity or even strategy. The people who stay outlast the people who don't, every single time. So how do you build it? It starts with reframing what discomfort means. Right now, for most people, discomfort is a signal to stop. The mind interprets it as danger. Something is wrong. This needs to end. Find an exit. And because that interpretation feels so convincing, so urgent, people obey it. They stop. They rest. They distract themselves. They come back later, or they don't come back at all. But here's the truth about initial discomfort. It's almost never danger. It's adjustment. It's your nervous system recalibrating to the new demand being placed on it. It's the feeling of growth, which is uncomfortable, not because something is going wrong, but because something is changing. When you change that interpretation, when you train yourself to recognize discomfort as a signal of progress happening rather than danger present, everything shifts. You stop trying to escape it. You stop treating it as evidence that you should quit. You start treating it as confirmation that you're doing something real. This is a mental reframe, and like all mental reframes, it doesn't click immediately. You have to practice it. You have to consciously notice the discomfort, consciously remind yourself what it means, consciously choose to stay anyway, again and again and again, until the new interpretation becomes automatic. And here's what happens when it does. Your threshold expands. The amount of discomfort you can hold without it triggering a retreat response gradually, measurably increases. What felt unbearable 3 months ago feels manageable today. Not because you became numb, because you became stronger. There's a beautiful parallel here to physical training that I want to draw out, because I think it makes this visceral in a way that's useful. When you first start lifting weights, even light weights feel heavy. Your muscles aren't adapted. The effort feels enormous relative to the load. But if you stay consistent, if you show up even when you're sore, even when you're tired, even when the progress feels imperceptible, something happens. Your muscles adapt. They build new fibers. They become capable of things they couldn't do before. And weights that once felt impossible start to feel manageable. Your mind works exactly the same way. The resistance you build when you stay present inside discomfort rather than escaping it is real, measurable, and cumulative. Every time you choose to endure, you are literally strengthening your capacity to endure. The mind that has been through discomfort before and stayed trusts itself in a way the mind that always escaped cannot. It has evidence. It knows it can handle things. And that knowledge reduces fear in a way that affirmations and positive thinking never can. Because the fear that underlies most avoidance isn't really about the specific discomfort. It's about not knowing if you can handle it. Build enough evidence that you can. Through repeated exposure, through consistently choosing to stay, and the fear starts to lose its grip. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get discussed often enough in conversations about mental endurance: silence. We live in a world that is almost aggressively loud. Constant notifications, endless content, music in every elevator, podcast in every commute, something playing in the background of nearly every moment of the day. And while none of that is inherently bad, it has created a generation of minds that have never learned to be comfortable in their own quiet. Silence is uncomfortable for a lot of people, not because silence is actually threatening, but because in the absence of external stimulation, you're left with your own thoughts. And for a mind that hasn't been trained, those thoughts can feel chaotic, critical, or simply boring. But here's what silence actually is for a trained mind. It's a sharpening tool. When you sit in silence, genuinely, without reaching for your phone, without filling the space with noise, your mind starts to organize itself. Patterns emerge. Clarity develops. You start to hear your own thinking more accurately, which means you start to understand yourself more accurately, which means your decisions improve. Mental endurance includes the ability to stay with your own mind in silence without immediately seeking escape. And this, too, is trainable. Start small. 5 minutes, 10. Just sitting, breathing, letting thoughts come and go without grabbing at them or running from them. It feels pointless at first. It might feel anxious. That's the adjustment. Stay anyway. Over time, Silence becomes something you seek rather than something you avoid. And a mind that can be still in silence can be still in chaos. Because stillness was never about the environment. It was always about the training. One final thing about mental endurance that I want to leave you with, because I think it reframes failure in a way that changes everything. Untrained minds see failure as a verdict. Something went wrong, which means I am wrong. The outcome was bad, which means I am bad. The attempt didn't work, which means I should stop attempting. That logic feels reasonable. It even feels humble, like you're being realistic, accepting your limits, reading the signs. But it's actually one of the most destructive patterns the mind can fall into. A mind with endurance sees failure completely differently. It sees failure as data, not as a story about who you are, but as information about what needs to adjust. Not as a stop sign, but as a detour sign. Not as evidence of limitation, but as part of the learning process that was always going to include this. When you can look at a setback and ask, "What does this tell me?" instead of, "What does this mean about me?" you've made one of the most important shifts available to a human mind. You've separated outcome from identity, and that separation is what allows you to keep going when lesser versions of yourself would stop. Build your endurance quietly, in the ordinary moments, in the Tuesday afternoons when nobody is watching and nothing feels exciting and the easier path is right there. Stay anyway. That staying is where transformation lives. Chapter 6. How to Think Straight When Everything is Spinning. Here's something that probably sounds familiar. You're in the middle of a complicated situation, maybe at work, maybe at home, maybe in a relationship, and there is so much information coming at you, so many opinions, so many moving parts. Everyone has something urgent to say. Every option seems to come with consequences you can't fully see. The pressure is building. Time feels short. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, you're supposed to make a good decision. And instead of thinking clearly, your mind starts to spin. You jump between options without landing on any. You seek more information hoping it will bring clarity, but it just adds more noise. You worry about getting it wrong, which makes it harder to see what's right. You feel the urgency rising, which compresses your thinking further, and somewhere in there you make a decision, not because you're clear, but because the discomfort of not deciding finally became unbearable. That decision, made from that place, is rarely your best one. Here's the thing about chaos. The chaos itself is rarely the problem. Chaos is just complexity. It's multiple variables moving at once. It's life, operating at its normal pace. The problem is what happens to most people's minds inside chaos. The spinning, the fragmentation, the urgency that distorts judgment. And the solution is not to wait for chaos to resolve before you think clearly. The solution is to train your mind to think clearly inside chaos, regardless of what's happening around you. This is the difference between surviving pressure and navigating it. Let me start with something counterintuitive. When the chaos increases, slow down. I know that feels wrong. When everything is spinning, the instinct is to speed up, to match the pace of the situation, to respond to the urgency, to do something because standing still feels like falling behind. But that instinct is the enemy of clear thinking. Speed without clarity is how crises escalate. It's how words get said that can't be unsaid. How decisions get made that take months to recover from. How small problems become large ones because someone acted before they understood what was actually happening. The trained mind does the opposite of speeding up when chaos arrives. It deliberately, intentionally slows its internal pace. It takes a breath. It narrows its focus. It asks one simple question: what actually matters most right now? And refuses to be pulled into everything else until that one thing is answered. That question, what matters most right now, is one of the most powerful clarity tools you have. Because chaos works by making everything feel equally urgent, equally important, equally demanding of your immediate attention. And none of that is true. Even in the most complex situations, there is always a hierarchy. There is always something that matters more than the rest. There is always a first domino. Find the domino. Focus there. Let everything else wait. This is not avoidance, it's sequencing. And sequencing is what clear thinkers do that reactive thinkers don't. Reactive thinkers try to address everything simultaneously. Clear thinkers move through complexity one step at a time in the right order without being distracted by the noise of everything that isn't the current step. Now let's talk about attention, because it's at the center of everything we're discussing here. Your attention is the most valuable resource you have. More valuable than time, more valuable than energy, more valuable than almost anything else. Because wherever your attention goes, your thinking follows. And whatever your thinking focuses on, your decisions reflect. Chaos is an attention thief. It floods you with stimuli and triggers and demands, all competing for the same finite resource. And if you don't protect your attention deliberately, it will be stolen from you constantly, by the loudest voice in the room, by the most urgent feeling notification, by the most emotionally activated person in your environment. Protecting your attention is an active discipline. It means making choices about what gets your focus and what doesn't. It means being willing to say not now to things that feel urgent but aren't actually important. It means creating enough space in your mind that there's room for the thinking that actually matters. Practically, this looks like, before you engage with a chaotic situation, taking 60 seconds to identify what you actually need to resolve. Not what's demanding your attention, what actually needs it. That distinction changes everything. Here's another piece that's critical for thinking clearly in chaos: emotional regulation. When emotions are running high, fear, frustration, urgency, overwhelm, your perception narrows. You literally see fewer options. You interpret situations more negatively. You are more prone to cognitive shortcuts and biases that lead you away from accuracy and toward comfort. This is not a character flaw. It's neuroscience. Under emotional activation, the part of your brain responsible for complex reasoning has less bandwidth. You're running on a different operating system, one built for survival, not for nuanced decision-making. Knowing this changes how you approach high-stakes moments. Before you try to think clearly, you need to create the conditions for clear thinking, which means regulate first, then reason. Feel the emotion. Name it internally. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling frustrated. That naming alone, what researchers call affect labeling, creates measurable distance between you and the feeling. It shifts your relationship to the emotion from I am this to I'm experiencing this. And that shift opens just enough space for your reasoning mind to step back in. From that slightly more regulated place, you can ask better questions. Not what's the worst that could happen, which amplifies fear, but what do I actually know right now? What am I assuming? What can I control? Those questions are grounding. They pull your thinking back to what's real, what's factual, what's actionable. And from that grounded place, clarity becomes possible. Not perfect, not complete, but enough to take the next right step. And that's really all you need. Not a perfect view of the entire situation, just enough clarity for the next step. Because the next step, taken clearly, leads to the one after that, which leads to the one after that, until the chaos has been navigated one clear decision at a time. Let me close this chapter with something I want you to genuinely take with you. Clarity is a competitive advantage in every domain of life. In conflict, the clearest mind controls the narrative. In business, the clearest thinker identifies the path everyone else missed. In relationships, the person who can see clearly through emotional fog is the one who actually resolves things instead of just reacting to them. Clarity is not intelligence, it's training. And it's available to you, not someday, not when things calm down, but in the next moment that asks you to think under pressure. Slow down. Protect your attention. Regulate before you reason. Find the one thing that matters most. That's how you think straight when everything is spinning. Chapter 7. The voice in your head is either your coach or your critic. You choose. Here's something I want you to try right now. Just for a moment, notice the voice in your head. Not this audio. The other voice. The one that was already there before you pressed play. The one that commented on your morning before it even properly started. The one that narrated your last difficult conversation after it ended. The one that shows up at 11 p.m. when you're trying to sleep and decides that's the perfect time to replay everything that went wrong this week. That voice. You know the one. Now ask yourself honestly, if that voice belonged to another person, if a friend or a colleague spoke to you the way that voice speaks to you, would you keep them in your life? For a lot of people, the honest answer is no, because the voice in their head is relentless in a way no reasonable friend would ever be. It catastrophizes, it generalizes, it holds on to failures long after the moment has passed. It compares constantly and unfavorably. It says things like, I always mess this up and I'm not built for this, and what's wrong with me, with a certainty and a cruelty that would be shocking if it came from someone else's mouth. And yet we accept it from ourselves. Not just accept it, we believe it. We treat it as truth. We let it set the ceiling for what we attempt, what we expect, and who we think we're allowed to become. This chapter is about changing that. Not by becoming relentlessly positive. I promised you this training was honest, not performative, but by becoming precise. By training the voice in your head to be accurate, directive, and grounded rather than dramatic, hostile, and destabilizing. Because here's what most people don't realize. Your self-talk is not just commentary. It's instruction. When you say to yourself, I can't handle this, you are not describing your capability. You are directing your nervous system. You are telling your body how to respond, telling your attention where to go, telling your motivation whether to show up. The mind doesn't hear your self-talk as observation. It hears it as command, which means that every time you speak to yourself in absolutes, I always fail at this. I never get it right. This is impossible. You are programming a response. You are training a pattern. And that pattern, repeated enough times, becomes the operating system underneath everything you do. This is not metaphor. This is how the mind actually works. The stories we tell ourselves under stress become the scripts we run automatically when similar stress appears again. And those scripts, those deeply grooved, often inherited, rarely examined patterns of self-narration, determine far more of our behavior than most people ever realize. So the first thing to understand about training your self-talk is this: you are already training it. Every day. The question is not whether you're conditioning your inner voice. The question is what you're conditioning it to do. Now let's talk about how to actually change it, practically, concretely, in a way that works in real moments rather than just sounding good in theory. The starting point is not content, it's tone. Before you try to change what your inner voice says, notice how it says it. Is it harsh, impatient, dismissive? Does it speak to you with the exhausted contempt of someone who has given up on you? Does it rush through encouragement but linger on criticism? Does it sound like the most skeptical person you've ever met, permanently unimpressed? Tone is upstream of content. A harsh tone creates tension in the body before a single specific thought lands. An urgent tone activates the stress response before any actual threat has been identified. The emotional register of your self-talk shapes your physiological state, and your physiological state shapes your thinking, your perception, and your decisions. A trained inner voice is not saccharine. It's not constantly cheerleading or telling you you're wonderful. It's neutral, firm, clear. It sounds less like a hype coach and more like a steady, trusted mentor who believes in you without needing to perform that belief, who speaks to you with the same calm authority whether you're winning or struggling. That tone is what you're building. Here's a concrete shift to start with. Notice when your self-talk becomes evaluative about your worth rather than instructive about your behavior. There's a critical difference between these two. I'm so stupid. I always make mistakes like this. That's worth evaluation. It attacks identity. That didn't work. What needs to change? That's behavioral instruction. It moves forward. The first version might feel like self-awareness. It isn't. It's self-attack. And self-attack does not motivate. It paralyzes. It creates shame. And shame makes people smaller, not larger. It makes people hide, not grow. The second version is honest about the outcome without making the outcome a verdict on the person. And from that place, clear, grounded, non-attacking, actual learning becomes possible. Actual adjustment becomes possible. Forward motion becomes possible. This is especially important in moments of failure because failure is when self-talk gets loudest and most dangerous. The untrained mind uses failure as fuel for a spiral. I knew this would happen. This always happens. Why do I even try? Those questions feel like processing. They're not. They're loops. They go nowhere except deeper into the same hole. A trained mind uses failure differently. It asks, what failed specifically? What does that tell me? What do I adjust? Those questions have answers. Those answers create direction. Direction creates momentum. And momentum is the antidote to the paralysis that failure so often produces. Let me talk about something else that is subtle but enormously impactful. The language of possibility versus the language of limitation. Untrained self-talk speaks in limitations constantly. I can't do this. This is too hard. I'm not the kind of person who... Each of those phrases closes a door. It narrows the available options. It tells the mind, stop looking for a way through because there isn't one. Trained self-talk speaks in instructions instead. Not false positivity, not I can do anything, when you genuinely don't believe it, but practical forward-moving direction. This is difficult. What's the next step? What do I actually know how to do here? What would help? The difference seems small on paper. In practice, it's the difference between a mind that keeps searching and a mind that gives up. Because the mind follows language. Where the language goes, attention follows. Where attention goes, possibility follows. A mind that speaks in limitations will consistently find limitations. A mind that speaks in instructions will consistently find paths. There's one more dimension of self-talk I want to address because I think it's one of the most overlooked: consistency. Many people are wildly inconsistent in how they speak to themselves. On a good day, when things are going well, when they slept enough, when they feel capable, the inner voice is relatively kind, encouraging even. You've got this. You're doing well. And then a hard day arrives, and suddenly the inner voice sounds like an entirely different person. Harsh, critical, impatient, quick to catastrophize, quick to give up. This inconsistency is destabilizing in a way that's hard to fully articulate, but I think you've felt it. The inner voice you can't rely on becomes a source of anxiety rather than a source of support. You never know which version of it you're going to get. And a mind that doesn't trust its own inner voice is always slightly on edge, waiting for the floor to drop out, waiting for the harsh version to show up and take over. A trained inner voice is consistent, not perfect, not always upbeat, but reliable in its tone, its standards, its direction. It sounds roughly the same on Tuesday as it does on Saturday. It doesn't radically change its assessment of you based on whether the morning went smoothly. That consistency is what transforms the inner voice from a liability into an asset. From the thing that tears you down under pressure into the thing that holds you steady when everything else is shifting. Training, this takes time. It takes noticing. It takes repeatedly, patiently, without self-judgment, redirecting the voice from drama to instruction, from attack to adjustment, from limitation to direction. But every time you do it, every single time you catch the harsh spiral and redirect it towards something grounded and useful, you are reinforcing a new pattern. You are building a new default. And eventually, that default becomes who you are. The voice in your head will always be there. The question is simply this: are you going to let it run on whatever programming it inherited, or are you going to train it into something that actually serves you? The answer to that question shapes everything. Chapter 8: The most underrated skill you'll ever develop. I want to tell you about the real reason most people don't get where they want to go. It's not what you think. It's not lack of talent. It's not bad luck. It's not the wrong circumstances or the wrong connections or the wrong timing. It's disappearing. They disappear when the excitement wears off. They disappear when progress slows to a pace that feels invisible. They disappear when the work stops feeling meaningful and starts feeling repetitive. They disappear when life gets complicated and the path forward requires more energy than they currently feel they have. And disappearing rarely feels like giving up. That's the insidious part. It feels like pausing. It feels like regrouping. It feels like being realistic, being smart, recognizing when something isn't working and adjusting accordingly. But weeks become months, and months accumulate into a pattern, and the pattern eventually becomes the story. I'm someone who starts things but doesn't finish them. I'm someone who gets excited but doesn't sustain it. I'm someone who wants things but can't seem to stay the course. That story is one of the most painful ones a person can carry, and it's built not through dramatic failure, but through repeated disappearance. One small, quiet, seemingly justifiable withdrawal at a time. Showing up is the skill that interrupts that story, and I call it a skill deliberately, because that's exactly what it is. It's not a personality trait. It's not a gift some people have and others don't. It is a trained, practiced, developable capacity. And like every other skill in this training, it can be built, starting with the very next opportunity I have to practice it. Let me tell you what showing up actually means, because I think it's simpler and more profound than most people realize. Showing up means acting without waiting for emotional permission. Not acting because you feel ready. Not acting because you feel motivated. Not acting because the conditions are right or the timing is perfect or the confidence is fully formed. Acting because this is what you do. Because you decided in advance, in a moment of clarity before the resistance arrived, that this matters, and you are someone who shows up for things that matter. That decision, made in advance and honored consistently, is one of the most powerful things a human being can do for themselves. Here's why. Every time you show up when you don't feel like it, you create evidence. Evidence that you are reliable to yourself. Evidence that your commitments are real. Evidence that the version of you who made the decision in the clear-headed moment can be trusted, even when the version of you in the difficult moment wants to negotiate. That evidence accumulates, and over time, it builds something that no amount of external validation can replicate. Genuine self-trust. The quiet, unshakable knowledge that you follow through, that you don't abandon yourself when things get hard, that you are, at your core, someone who stays. Now, I want to talk about something that tends to make showing up feel harder than it needs to be, and that's the way most people think about consistency. Most people think about consistency as a streak, as an unbroken chain. And the problem with that framing is that the moment the chain breaks, one missed day, one difficult week, one period of life where everything fell apart and the routine went with it, the whole thing feels lost. I broke the streak. I failed. I have to start over. And starting over from that place of self-judgment takes so much energy that many people don't start over at all. Here's a different way to think about consistency. It's not about the streak. It's about the return. Missing a day doesn't destroy your consistency. Staying gone does. The trained mind doesn't catastrophize a missed session or a hard week. It notices the gap. It doesn't make the gap mean something terrible about itself, and it returns. Simply, cleanly, without the drama of a new beginning or the weight of accumulated guilt. Return is the skill, not perfection. Return. This reframe changes the emotional weight of showing up enormously, because suddenly There's no catastrophic failure available. There's only, did I return? And returning is always possible. It's always one decision away. Let me talk about boredom, because I think it's one of the most underestimated obstacles to showing up consistently, and I want to reframe it completely. Boredom is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that you've been here long enough for the novelty to wear off. And what remains is the actual work. Most people leave when boredom arrives. They interpret it as the work telling them, this isn't for you. Find something more interesting. This path has run its course. And so they find something more interesting, and they stay there until the novelty of that wears off, and then they leave again. And this cycle continues, leaving a trail of abandoned beginnings and never quite reached middles behind them. But here's what's actually true about boredom. It's the gateway to depth. The surface layer of anything, any skill, any relationship, any pursuit is stimulating. It's new, it's interesting, it's full of discovery. But the depth, the place where genuine mastery lives, where real connection forms, where the thing you set out to build actually gets built, that's on the other side of boredom. The people who become genuinely excellent at things are not the people who found a path that never got boring. They're the people who stayed when it did. Showing up also does something that I think is deeply underappreciated in a world obsessed with breakthroughs and transformations. It builds a reputation with yourself. Every time you show up, you cast a vote for the person you're becoming. Every single time, not a dramatic vote, not a world-changing vote, just a quiet, private, consistent vote that says, this is who I am. I am someone who shows up, and those votes accumulate. Slowly at first, in a way that's hard to feel. But over months and years, the accumulated weight of those votes becomes something you can feel. In how you carry yourself, in how you relate to challenges, in the baseline confidence that comes not from being told you're capable, but from having built evidence of it. That's when something remarkable happens. Showing up stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like identity. You don't show up because you're forcing yourself to. You show up because not showing up would feel like a betrayal of who you are. That shift from I have to this is what I do is the goal. And it's built one ordinary, unglamorous, nobody is watching, showing up at a time. The world will not applaud your consistency. It won't celebrate your quiet, daily, unspectacular commitment to the process. It will notice the results eventually, and often be surprised by them, attributing to luck or talent what was actually built through years of showing up. But you will know. You will know what it cost. You will know what you chose again and again in the moments when leaving would have been so much easier. And that knowledge, private, earned, unshakable, is worth more than any amount of external recognition. Show up. Not when it's exciting. Not when you feel ready. Not when the conditions are perfect. Show up especially when none of those things are true. That's where your strength is built. That's where your story changes. That's where the person you're becoming is waiting for you. The training doesn't end here. It begins. Here you made it. Not just to the end of this audiobook, although that matters. And I want you to acknowledge that for a moment. A lot of people start things like this and drift away somewhere in the middle. You stayed. That staying is already the first act of the trained mind. It already counts. But I want to be honest with you about something, because this training has been built on honesty from the very first word. What you've heard over these chapters is not a transformation. It's a map. The transformation, the actual felt, lived change in how you respond to pressure, how you speak to yourself, how you show up when everything in you wants to leave. That happens in the moments after this. In the ordinary Tuesday when nobody is watching. In the difficult conversation you handle differently because of what you practiced here. In the moment when the old reaction starts to form and something new intercepts it. That's where this becomes real, not in the listening, in the living. And I want to talk to you about that, about what actually comes next, and how to make sure that what you've built here doesn't quietly dissolve the way so many well-intentioned beginnings do. The 8 principles as a living system. Let's take a moment to look at what you've actually built across these 8 chapters, not as a list to memorize, but as a system to inhabit. You started with the inner game, the recognition that everything external is preceded by something internal, that before you lose a situation out there, you've already lost it in here. And that winning in here is not about becoming emotionless or robotic, but about building the kind of groundedness that doesn't get swept away every time life pushes back. From there, you moved into discipline, the understanding that feelings are passengers, not drivers, that the life you want is not built on motivation, which comes and goes like weather, but on standards, which hold regardless of weather. That discipline is not punishment. It is the decision made in advance that frees you from the exhausting daily negotiation between who you are and who you're trying to become. Then calm, the skill most people wish they had, but few actually train. The recognition that the body calms the mind, not the other way around. That one breath taken deliberately in the right moment can change the entire trajectory of a situation. That calm is not absence of feeling. It is presence of control. Then the pause, perhaps the simplest and most powerful tool in this entire training. The space between trigger and response where your power lives, where the difference between a reaction and a choice gets made, where, in a single breath, you can reclaim authorship of your own behavior. Then endurance, the quiet, unglamorous, deeply necessary capacity to stay when everything says go, to reframe discomfort as adjustment rather than danger, to find boredom as the gateway to depth rather than a signal to leave, to show your nervous system through repeated experience that difficulty is survivable, and that survival, practiced enough, becomes strength. Then clarity, the ability to think straight when everything is spinning, to slow down when the instinct is to speed up, to protect your attention like the finite, precious resource it actually is, to regulate before you reason, and to find the one thing that matters most rather than drowning in the noise of everything. Then self-talk, the training of the voice that never stops speaking, the shift from commentary to instruction, from attack to adjustment, from limitation to direction, the recognition that you are already conditioning your inner voice every single day, and that the only question is whether you're doing it deliberately or by default. And finally, showing up, the rarest and most decisive skill of all, the commitment to act without waiting for emotional permission, to return after gaps without catastrophizing the gap, to cast quiet, consistent private votes for the person you're becoming, one ordinary moment at a time. These 8 principles are not 8 separate things. They are 8 expressions of the same underlying truth, that the quality of your inner world determines the quality of your outer life, that the mind, trained deliberately and consistently, becomes the most reliable advantage you will ever have. Not because it eliminates difficulty, but because it changes your relationship to difficulty entirely. When these principles work together, when the inner game is strong, when discipline is leading, when calm is accessible, when the pause is habitual, when endurance holds, when clarity cuts through, when self-talk is precise, and when showing up is non-negotiable, something shifts, not dramatically, not overnight, but genuinely, measurably, permanently. The situations that used to knock you sideways start to feel navigable. The people who used to trigger automatic reactions start to lose that power. The moments that used to produce regret start to produce something different. A quiet satisfaction, a sense of authorship, a feeling of being in your own life rather than being carried along by it. That feeling is what we're building toward, and it is absolutely within your reach. A direct conversation. Before you go, I want to speak to you directly now, not as a training, not as a system, not as a framework, just one honest voice to whoever is listening. You are not here by accident. People who find their way to something like this, who stay through 8 chapters of real, demanding, uncomfortable mental training, are not passive people. They are people who feel the gap between who they are under pressure and who they know they're capable of being, between the reactions they default to and the responses they wish they had given, between the version of themselves that shows up on good days and the version that shows up when things get hard. You feel that gap. That's why you're still here. And I want you to know something about that gap. It is not evidence of your limitation. It is evidence of your awareness. And awareness, honest, clear, unflinching awareness of where you are and where you want to be, is the beginning of everything. Most people never close that gap because they never honestly look at it. They sense it, they feel the discomfort of it, and they immediately look for something to reduce that discomfort, a distraction, a rationalization, a story that makes the distance feel acceptable or inevitable or someone else's fault. You didn't do that. You looked at it. You stayed with it. You let 8 chapters of honest training land on it. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Now, here are 3 questions I want to leave you with. Not rhetorical questions, real ones. Questions that deserve honest answers, even if those answers are only ever between you and yourself. The first question, of the 8 principles you've moved through today, which one felt the most uncomfortable? Not the most interesting, the most uncomfortable. The one where you recognized yourself most clearly in the description of the untrained mind. The one that made you slightly defensive or slightly ashamed or slightly hopeful in a way that felt almost painful, because you could see so clearly the distance between where you are and where you need to be. That principle is your starting point. Not because it's the most important in the abstract, but because it's the most important for you right now in this season of your life. That's where your next level is waiting. That's where your 30 days of deliberate practice should begin. Don't try to work all 8 at once. Training doesn't work that way. Choose one. Apply it deliberately repeatedly in real moments for 30 days. Then return and choose the next. The second question, what has your untrained mind already cost you? I want you to sit with that question rather than skim past it. Not in a punishing way, not to create guilt or shame, which, as we talked about in the self-talk chapter, do nothing useful, but in a clarifying way. Because the clearer you are about what reactive patterns have actually cost you, in relationships, in opportunities, in the quiet erosion of your own self-respect, the more real your motivation to train becomes. Regret, when used correctly, is not a weight. It is a compass. Let it point you forward. The third question, who else in your life needs this? Think for a moment about the people around you, the ones who are struggling not because their circumstances are impossible, but because their reactions are making everything harder. The ones who are losing relationships not from lack of love, but from lack of control. The ones who are disappearing from their own goals not from lack of talent, but from lack of endurance. The ones who speak to themselves in ways that are slowly dismantling their own confidence. You found this training. They haven't yet. And here's something worth understanding about sharing it. When you teach something, you deepen it in yourself. When you pass a principle on to someone else, you anchor it more firmly in your own practice. When you say to someone you care about, "This helped me," I think it might help you. You are not just offering them a gift. You are strengthening your own commitment. That is not a small thing. That is one of the most effective forms of repetition available to you. What comes next? Here at Better You. Audiobooks, everything we build carries the same intention as what you've just experienced. Not to entertain, not to produce a temporary feeling of inspiration that fades by Thursday. To train, to give your mind the structure, the language, and the repeated exposure it needs to perform at a higher level. Not on the good days, but on the hard ones. Not when it's easy, but when it matters. If this training delivered something real to you, something you can feel settling into your thinking rather than simply passing through it, then the next step is simple. Return. Come back. Listen again, because repetition is how training works. And the second time through, you will hear things you missed the first time. Your mind will be ready for depth. It wasn't ready for today. And bring someone with you. Because the work of building a trained mind is not solitary. It is reinforced by community, by the people around you who are also choosing training over default, who are also building the pause, who are also learning to let discipline drive when feelings grab the wheel. Better You. Audiobooks exists to be a consistent presence in that journey. Every piece of content on this channel is built with the same care and the same intention as what you've just experienced. We are here every time you return. The standard you're carrying forward. As this training closes, I want to leave you not with a quote or a slogan, but with a standard. The standard of someone who has genuinely trained their mind. It is the standard of someone who pauses before reacting, not always perfectly, but consistently enough that the pause has become a reflex rather than an exception. It is the standard of someone who lets discipline lead when feelings offer an easier path, who has learned from experience that the easier path almost always costs more in the long run. It is the standard of someone who builds calm rather than waiting for it, who knows that the breath taken in the difficult moment is not weakness, but one of the most powerful tools available. It is the standard of someone who controls their responses rather than being controlled by their triggers, who has stopped broadcasting their vulnerabilities and started protecting their power. It is the standard of someone who stays when everything says go, who has learned that boredom is the gateway to depth and that the ordinary moment, chosen again and again, is where extraordinary outcomes are actually built. It is the standard of someone who thinks clearly in chaos, who protects their attention, slows down when the instinct is to speed up, and finds the one thing that matters most rather than drowning in the noise of everything. It is the standard of someone who speaks to themselves with precision rather than drama, whose inner voice has been trained into a steady, reliable, directive presence rather than a harsh and unpredictable critic. And it is the standard of someone who shows up every time without waiting for emotional permission, without needing the conditions to be perfect, without requiring applause or validation or guaranteed outcomes, just showing up. Because that is what they do. Because that is who they are. That standard is high. I won't pretend otherwise. It demands something real from you, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulated weight of thousands of ordinary ones. And it is completely, entirely, without question, within your reach. Not because this training said so, because you proved it by staying through every word of it, by letting the discomfort land, by not skipping the parts that felt too close, by sitting with the questions that didn't have easy answers. That staying was the first proof. Now go build the rest. You cannot control every situation that comes toward you. You cannot guarantee every outcome. You cannot protect yourself from every hardship or every difficulty or every moment when life decides to test everything you've built. But you can control this, who you are when those moments arrive, how you respond, whether you pause or react, whether you stay or disappear, whether you speak to yourself with precision or with cruelty, whether you let discipline drive or hand the wheel to whatever you happen to be feeling at 7 a.m. on a difficult Wednesday. That control, quiet, private, daily, unannounced, is where winning actually happens. Not in the highlight moments, in the ordinary ones. Train your mind every single day, not when it's comfortable, not when you feel inspired. Train it in the moments that cost something, in the moments when the old patterns show up and ask to take over, in the moments when showing up feels impossible and you do it anyway. Those moments define you, and if you train your mind for them, really train it, consistently, patiently, with the kind of quiet commitment that doesn't need an audience, then you will be ready. Ready for every situation, ready for every pressure, ready for every version of difficulty that life has waiting for you. Because a trained mind doesn't fear situations, it meets them. And that meeting, steady, grounded, deliberate, controlled, is how you win. Every time. Better You Audiobooks will be here when you're ready to go deeper. Until then, keep training, stay steady, and remember, the mind you build today is the life you live tomorrow.